Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today we're going to be talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. Before we get started with the video, though, a couple of disclaimers. In the past, I've had a few people tell me that I'm a Sixers hater and I say all these negative things about them, and I'm willing to admit that there's probably more negative things about the Sixers in general on this channel than there are positive things, but this is also a team that just a couple of days ago I said had the highest ceiling in the Eastern Conference. So this is not meant to be just me trashing the Sixers just because. These are all my actual opinions. Okay, so the Philadelphia 76ers this season, they have been extremely irritating to watch and to follow, and there's just so many things about this team that bother me that, yeah, we're just going to go through them today. So this is a team that just a week ago on Christmas Day looked about as impressive as you possibly could against what to that point in the season had probably been the best team in the entire league in the Milwaukee Bucks. They pummeled them. The game was never close. They made a ton of threes, and they looked like the best version of themselves. And again, I said in that video talking about Christmas Day that this team had, one of the highest ceilings in the league and the highest ceiling in the Eastern Conference when they're right and when they're playing well. So since then, they haven't won a game. They've lost 3 in a row, and that is just the first most frustrating thing for me about this team is just how inconsistent they are. To be fair, the first 2 were only by a single point, and then the third, they didn't have Joel Embiid, but they still got absolutely pummeled by the Pacers to an extent that they should not have. And that is probably the most frustrating thing about this team is how talented they are, but how inconsistent they are in the regular season and how nonchalant they seem to be on a night-to-night basis as a team as a whole. There is no way that a team, even, missing Joel Embiid, there's no way they should be down 36 in that game to Indiana. I understand that NBA teams have up and down nights. Sometimes you just get outshot. I get it. But there's no way that a team that talented that just a couple of days ago destroyed a team that looked like the best team in the league to that point in the year should be losing by 30 plus to Indiana, even without Joel Embiid. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? It's all of this talent that they have, but how inconsistent they are. And then it's also the fit, how talented this group is and how little they actually fit together. You've got a quote-unquote point guard that's 6'9", 6'10", that can't shoot, never ventures outside the paint. You have a center that has to accommodate that player by being on the perimeter way more than he should and loves to do this little ball fake drive to the rim thing that nobody falls for anymore and spends way too much time on the perimeter. Not necessarily his fault, but just out of necessity. My issue here is with the team as a whole, not just with the individual players, but Joel Embiid as a whole generally should not be outside as much as he is because he's one of the most dominant forces in the league when he's actually in the paint. Tobias Harris is a player that they traded for last year that was having a lot of success as an individual scorer throughout his career, but especially with LA last year as an on-the-ball player, and now he's being asked to do a ton of stuff off the ball and shoot threes, and he's still having a solid season, but not in the ideal situation for himself at all. Josh Richardson is probably the one that fits in the best here because he fits in really well on a lot of teams because he can defend, he can shoot a little bit, he'll work on his shooting stroke, but he doesn't need the ball a ton to be effective. Nice complementary player in the starting unit. And then you've got Al Horford, who I understood the reasons why they signed him to what they did and why they signed him in general at the time, because Embiid's going to be missing games. They want to make sure that they're still good during the regular season, but still not a great fit in today's NBA in terms of him and Embiid playing together at the same time. And it's just kind of a weird fit. And then all of the other guys that they have, they don't shoot the ball well enough to complement all of these other options that for the most part, their biggest issue is shooting, and a lot of their other players just don't provide enough in that category either. And as a result of that, this is not a fun team to watch. Like, unless they're playing out of their minds defensively and they're getting out in transition, this team is not fun to watch at all. It's a lot of Joel Embiid working from like the top of the key and then Ben Simmons down in the dunker spot, and it's just, there's just no flow to it whatsoever because of all of the flaws and the issues with the fit that I talked about. It's way too packed in. When you compare watching them offensively to most other teams around the league, it doesn't work, right? Like, they don't do a ton of pick and roll. They do a lot of dribble handoff and just kind of post up and high post stuff that it's very clogged together, right? And they're just not a fun team to watch at all, which again is extremely frustrating because they are so talented. Now, getting back to the fit thing really quick, let's go through this by a couple of specific things, okay? So they have a couple of players that are elite at a handful of things that are just not being utilized in those skills at all. The first one for sure is Ben Simmons. And I've got a couple of Ben Simmons sections in this video, but this part is just about He's an outstanding defender when engaged and when he provides effort, and he's been doing a lot better job of that this year, so shout out to him for that. But he is a player that needs to be in control of the game and needs shooters around him, and they refuse to do that. And then Joel Embiid, as I talked about a little bit earlier, like, he's on the perimeter way too much because he's probably like the third best three-point shooter in their starting lineup for whatever reason, and he is so dominant in the paint. But it's also about the fact that this guy won't prioritize being in as good a shape as possible, because again, nobody can really stop this guy when he's right, when he's healthy. There's not a whole lot you can do about Joel Embiid in the paint with the way that the rules are now and how skilled he is and how big he is, but he hasn't committed himself to being a supreme dominant force like Giannis. Those two guys are probably the two most dominant players physically in the entire league, but you see the difference in the physique of Giannis and Embiid, and I understand there's different body types and body compositions and things like that, but Giannis has clearly taken that part of his game a lot more seriously, and he's won an MVP and probably will win a second as a result. Now, certainly Giannis has been put in a better situation the past year and a half in Milwaukee than Embiid ever has been put in Philadelphia, but it's just so frustrating. And then back to Simmons, and I'll talk about the front office and issues that I have there. I don't get it, right? Like, what is the deal with just not even trying to shoot threes? I don't understand why it's just not even an option. Like, his coach publicly said that he wants him to shoot at least 1 3 a game, and he hasn't shot a 3 since, and he just doesn't care, right? Like, there has to be a point in which we say, okay, it's not that he's scared, it's not that he thinks it's an inefficient shot, he just doesn't care enough to work on his game and to shoot threes in game. And he's definitely shooting with the wrong hand, by the way, which I don't really need to rant on too much because I've already made a video about that way back in the past. But why not just try it? I don't care if he shoots it off the side of the backboard half the time. Just shoot a 3 in the game, because you can shoot it 1,000 times in the gym by yourself every single day. But if you never do it in the game, it's not going to matter, and it's not going to actually improve as much as it would. Just do it. I don't understand why this continues to be an issue. And then beyond the individual players that are on the roster right now, this front office has made misstep after misstep over the last handful of seasons. And basically, ever since this whole process thing started, now they're not going to get every single move right, but basically the only top draft picks that they've gotten correct that have stayed and stuck around are Simmons and Embiid. Everybody else has been a misstep, whether it's Nerlens Noel, Jahlil Okafor, Dario Saric, who they ended up trading for Jimmy Butler, was good for them initially. But other than that, you can't really think of too many success stories. Then you've got the Markelle Fultz thing that they botched in every possible way, right? Like, whether it was physically, whatever happened there, whether he did that to himself, whether the Sixers did that, we'll probably never know what exactly happened there, but they had all kinds of issues. They couldn't remedy it. By the way, the Magic seem to be doing a pretty good job of remedying it now that he's out of Philadelphia. And then when they traded him, they got nothing. They got Jonathan Simmons, who's not even in the league anymore, for a guy that looks like a rotation guard for Orlando when healthy now. And he, by the way, would be perfect for this team right now as a perimeter playmaker. This was supposed to be the cherry on top, the guy that was going to bring this roster together. They went into an offseason with Ben Simmons coming off of a year that he looked outstanding when he played, and then Joel Embiid, who looked like at times a top 5 player. They went into an offseason in which they had that, and they had the 3rd overall pick and max cap space, and they didn't improve their roster at all. Every single other move that they made came in subsequent off seasons and with subsequent signings and trades. It didn't have anything to do with that off season, and I don't understand how that's possible. And then after that, basically every move that they've made has been a mistake. This team needs Robert Covington. He's not there. They traded him for Jimmy Butler, or they traded for Josh Richardson, who's not as effective of a player in this whole system as Robert Covington would have been. That's essentially what they did. They swapped Robert Covington and Dario Saric for Josh Richardson, and that's a negative. Say what you want to say about Jimmy Butler, but those two players, not having them and only having Josh Richardson instead, that's absolutely a negative. And then the Tobias Harris thing, good player, I like him. Not an outstanding fit on this team. They need off-ball shooters. They don't need guys that need the ball in their hands, whether it be low post, high post, or in ball screens. They need guys that can defend and can shoot, and Tobias can do some of those things, but you're paying him $30 to $40 million over the next 5 seasons to do just that, when there are other guys that you could have gotten to do that for much cheaper, or I don't know, get multiple guys so it's not just your starting unit every game. Now, are there excuses for this team? Absolutely. They've had some injury issues. Some of those they've brought brought on themselves, and some of them, you just can't help, like the Embiid thing. They knew it was a risk when they took him. He ended up being an outstanding player, is a great player, and maybe he can prevent some of those things a little bit better, but injuries are going to happen. The Ben Simmons thing, maybe it's a complete mental issue with him in terms of he can't get over, oh, if I miss all these threes, everybody's going to be talking about it all the time. Everybody always talks about it when I make a three or when I shoot a three, and maybe he just can't get over that, okay? Like, yeah, there's excuses. You're not going to get every trade right. Sometimes things aren't going to fit super well together. But every other team in the league has excuses as well, and they're not disappointing to the point that this team is now. Like, just from a record standpoint, the regular season, this team should be so much better than it is. And maybe they'll turn it around. I have no idea. But when it gets to this point, things have to be evaluated. And the fact that Brett Brown is still the coach, seemingly just because people really like him within the front office and around the league or whatever, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And I think that this is definitely a team that from an X's and O's standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, from a fit standpoint, is inherently flawed, but also extremely talented. The fact that they almost beat the Raptors last year with the group that they had put together in terms of the fit shows you how talented they are. And the fact that they destroyed the Bucks on Christmas Day shows you how talented they are. But that talent can only overcome this awful fit and some of the issues with their own players individually so many times. And it's just so frustrating that this is a team that has all that talent, but seems so much closer to breaking up the Embiid Simmons thing than they are to actually reaching their potential on a consistent basis. And I think that's the point that we're at, and we've been there for a while. This is a team that has let this happen to themselves. They went through all of that losing. They went through the process, which I was in favor of at the time in terms of building a competitive team. You can talk about the morals of it if you want to, but in terms of building a competitive team, I thought it was a great strategy, and I think it continues to be a great strategy. And what they got out of it was Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, two players that do not fit together on the same team unless you have all the shooting in the world around them, and they do not have a great shooting supporting cast. So I would love to see Ben Simmons traded away to a different team, put in a Giannis type role, put all these other shooters and a couple of good playmakers around Joel Embiid, and let him do what he does, because I think they're a detriment to each other at this point with the supporting cast that has been put around them to this point. There are so many issues with this team, and it breeds inconsistency and it breeds disappointment, and it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating. Okay, there you go. That's my rant. There you have it. That's going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.